Okay, so we would like to welcome Kathy Schneider, who is the co-chair of the Current Breeding Bird Atlas Project for New York. Kathy grew up in Claverack and attended Hudson High School, and then Cornell and Princeton Universities, where she completed a PhD. She returned to Columbia County in 1986 and directed the New York Natural Heritage Program for 14 years, as well as conducting bird surveys for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She's the past president of the New York State Ornithological Association, a former member of the Columbia County Environmental Management Council, and a Columbia Land Conservancy volunteer. So with that, Kathy, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. And hopefully, let's see. There you go. Now let's get it on the right view. Okay, how's that?
Looks great.
That's it? Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm pleased to be here tonight and have an opportunity to talk to you about the third New York State Breeding Bird Atlas. I basically tried to divide this talk up into 3 parts. I'm going to start out by trying to explain what an atlas is and why I think breeding bird atlases are important. I'm going to talk about how we're doing a breeding bird atlas in New York State. And then finally, I think I've saved the best for last. I want to tell you a little bit about what we've learned so far. This is a 5-year project and we're only 2 years into it. So I have some preliminary results that I can share with you, but it's nowhere near the end of the story as far as this is concerned. Okay, so is this showing? I have a bar on the top of my slides here. It doesn't show to you, right? You're not seeing that. Okay, good.
No, it looks great.
That's good. Okay, so I'm going to start by trying to answer the question of what is a breeding bird atlas, because I think this kind of a research project may be unfamiliar to many of you in the audience. It basically is a scientific research project and typically done by what we call citizen scientists. These are just ordinary people, ordinary bird watchers, but they're organized and their data gathering is managed by professional ornithologists. So it's a scientific research project that's done by volunteers. And what it does is it creates a snapshot of the distribution of breeding birds for a specific time period in a specific geographic area. So the first atlases were done in the United Kingdom in the 1960s. And since then, they've been so useful that they've spread to other countries. They've been conducted worldwide, basically. They've been done in all the states in the United States and in all the provinces in Canada. The first atlas was done in New York State 40 years ago, from 1980 to 1985. The atlas work was repeated again 20 years later, from 2000 to 2005. And now it's 20 years past that second atlas, which is why we are starting the third one. And I'll get into why these atlases are repeated at 20-year intervals in a minute or so. So 2 years ago, we started on the third New York State Breeding Bird Atlas project. So this is a picture of, oh, I didn't mean to do that. This is a picture of the distribution of ospreys in New York State during the second Breeding Bird Atlas. So to create an atlas of any geographic area, basically what you do is divide the state up into geographic blocks. So all these little purple squares are blocks, and you send your volunteers out to observe birds and to record breeding behavior. So this picture shows places where osprey bred in New York State between 2000 and 2005. With Breeding Bird Atlas information, you can actually make maps like this for any bird that breeds in New York State. And this information is extremely valuable for a lot of different reasons. Let's see. So let me just give you an example here. This is an example of a bird, what's called a change map. And we can learn a lot from this kind of information. So this is an example of red-headed woodpecker, which is a fairly uncommon bird. It's quite rare in Columbia County. But this map shows information from the 2 atlases from from the one that was done in the 1980s and the one that was done in the 2000s. And the orange blocks show places where the bird was lost between 1980, from the 1980 atlas to the second atlas. Green ones are where the bird was present during both atlases. And the bluish purple blocks show atlas blocks where there were new birds in the second atlas. So this bird was considered secure in New York State by the New York Natural Heritage Program during the first atlas. There were a lot of places, all those orange plot places were occupied as well as the green ones. The second atlas showed that the bird had disappeared from all the orange blocks and only gained in the purple blocks here. So this shows that there had been a very significant change in the distribution of this bird in the 20 intervening years. And it compelled the Natural Heritage Program to change its status in New York from apparently secure to imperiled based on the information that was gathered from those two atlases. So this is the kind of information that we can get out of an atlas. The news isn't always bad. We can also do things with information from two atlases for a bird like this. This is a bird called a merlin. It's a very small little falcon that's found in Columbia County. But what's interesting about merlin is that merlin was not known to occur in New York State before 1992, okay? It was never found in New York State before 1992. So during the first atlas, you would have had a blank map for merlin, okay? But in the intervening years, it started to come into New York State. So the second atlas, the second atlas showed, this would have been blank for the first atlas, but for the second atlas, these are all sites where merlin was found breeding in the state. So it had a pretty broad distribution throughout the Adirondacks, a few sites in the Finger Lakes, none down in the Hudson Valley. And what we're expecting to see based on reports since the last atlas, we think that in the 20 years that's occurred since the second atlas, and now we think we're going to see a further expansion of merlin into parts of the state where we haven't before. And at the end of this, I'll show you what we've found so far. I skipped over a slide by mistake, so I'm going to kind of fill in that information. I said that this information was valuable for a number of reasons, not just to show changes in bird distributions, but also because of the kinds of things we can do with breeding bird atlas information. So when development proposals are suggested, for example, or a new solar array is proposed for an area, we can make wise land use decisions about where we put those kinds of projects with this kind of information. The breeding bird atlas information is actual data on the ground that have been confirmed and documented well. So atlases are really important for land use planning purposes as well. Let's see. I also wanted to mention that we have a fair amount of information from scientific studies that birds are in significant decline. This is a study that was published in Science magazine, a refereed scientific journal, and it was written by a guy named Ken Rosenberg and a bunch of other authors in 2019. And what this study showed was that 2.9 billion birds have disappeared from the earth since 1970. Now, how did they come upon this discovery? Basically, what they were doing was they were using long-term data sets, things like breeding bird atlas information and information from breeding bird survey routes and lots of other long-term data sets that they were able to pull together in one scientific paper. And through the magic of statistical analysis, it's a refereed journal, so it's not really magic, it's really good science. But what they're doing is they're able to demonstrate that the numbers of birds in North America and Canada have declined dramatically. This study was published in Science, which only scientists read, but it was picked up by Audubon as well. And it got quite a lot of press back in 2019. And what I want to point out is that this kind of a study would not have been possible without long-term data sets like the kinds we do at 20-year intervals for a breeding bird atlas. So this is another part of the study, the disturbing thing about this study is not just that there's 2.9 billion birds that are no longer with us, but also that the declines were across many, many different groups. So it wasn't just sparrows, or it wasn't just warblers. Basically, many different kinds of birds, finches, blackbirds, warblers, starlings, the birds that you think would be quite common, are showing just significant declines in abundance. The birds that are increasing are the wetland birds stand out on this. The ducks and other wetland species are doing better. And we think that's at least partly because wetlands are well protected. We have good laws in place to protect wetlands. So ducks and geese and other wetland species are showing some increases, but some birds, like grassland birds, for example, are really taking it on the chin. They've declined dramatically. And because of the kind of study this is, it's likely that there's a lot of different factors involved here. Climate change may be one of them. Disappearance of habitat may be another. I mean, there's just a whole lot of different causes of bird declines, but the end result is that this is kind of troubling data, and breeding bird atlases can contribute to helping us understand why these declines have occurred. Okay, so with this breeding bird atlas, if we basically agree that it's a good thing to do one, and it's probably a good idea to repeat them at 20-year intervals because bird distribution change, what we want to accomplish with this study is to basically assess the distribution and abundance of breeding birds in New York State between 2020 and 2024, that's 5 years. And we want to do this in a way that will allow a valid comparison with previous atlases and with future atlases. And we hope that this information will be used to inform conservation of birds and their habitats. And I wanted to put this, I've prepared a handout that Heidi's going to distribute by email after the talk is over. But this website at the bottom is our Atlas website. And I'm not going to have time to go into detail about some of the things I'm going to talk about, but I wanted to give you references so that you'd be able to learn more about the Atlas. So this is the Atlas website, and that will be on the handout as well when you receive it. So let's say you want to do this, you want to do a third breeding bird atlas for New York State. How do you go about doing it? So this is the second part that I wanted to talk about. First thing you do is you assemble a group of birding friends, basically organizations that are involved in bird conservation in New York State, and you form a steering committee. So there are 7 different organizations that are a part of the steering committee for the Breeding Bird Atlas. This includes the New York Natural Heritage Program, which is a biodiversity inventory that's supported by SUNY ESF here down at the bottom. They manage the program for them. And the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation sits on the steering committee. We have representatives from the USGS, there's a unit of the USGS at Cornell University, and they're involved. The New York State Ornithological Association, which is basically birders in New York State, National Audubon's involved, and eBird. eBird may not be familiar to you, but it is part of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And eBird organizes data for birding projects all over the world, basically. So these are the 7 groups that are sitting on the steering committee and are making decisions to administer and manage the funds that support the Atlas. The next thing you have to do is you have to get money. And I will just say that we are getting a nice chunk of funds to do this 5-year project from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. The DEC uses this information from the Bird Atlas, and what they are doing is they are passing through federal money from Pittman-Roberts funds to the Pittman-Roberts funds are federal monies that go to the Department of Environmental Conservation, and those funds are passed to the Heritage Program, which is more able to spend money than the DEC is easily because of bureaucratic stuff. But anyhow, we are supported almost entirely by these pass-through funds from the Fish and Wildlife, from the federal government to the DEC. And we're very grateful for that kind of funding. Initially, we only had 3 years worth of support, but we recently received a second grant, and now we have enough money to fund the projects to the end of the field seasons at least. We are still looking for additional funds to support our final product, be it a book or a website. But right now we're in pretty good shape until the 5 years are up. So you get these groups together and they get money and they make a plan for how we're going to do this atlas. The next thing you have to do, I'm skipping a slide here. I'm not quite sure why I went back. This is the slide I wanted to show you. So the next thing you do, now once you've got some money, is you get some staff. So I said that these citizen science projects are administered by people who know what they're doing. And our project coordinator, Julie Hart, is on the left side of this slide. She's an extremely capable project manager. And we've also, in addition to hiring her, we have paid a pittance to regional coordinators around the state. These are mostly volunteers, but this is the way we've divided up the work in the state. We have these different regional coordinators, and like the 3 guys at the top are encouraging birders in the Adirondacks. And we have people in western part of the state and central and capital, and these 5 or 6 different parts of the state. And these are our regional coordinators. And what our regional coordinators are doing are telling people about the atlas, telling them how they can get involved, and encouraging them to gather data in a way that using the protocols of the Breeding Bird Atlas. So these people are distributed throughout the state, which is good because they can talk to people in the urban centers and encourage them to go into parts of the state where we might not have adequate coverage. So these are the blocks. I said that when you do an atlas, you've got to divide up the habitat, right? So these are the blocks that we've divided New York State up into. It's a big state, and there are 5,710 blocks on our atlas website. You can adopt one of these blocks and decide you want to be a principal atlaser. When you just take on the responsibility of being a principal atlaser, what you're saying is, I'm going to make sure that that block gets adequate coverage and that all the breeding birds are documented. Maybe you don't want that much responsibility. Maybe you just want to be a helper. Well, that's just fine. You don't have to sign up for a block. You can just go to the website, pick the block that's near your house, and start bird watching. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. We know from our experience in the previous 2 atlases that we have issues with getting certain parts of the state covered. We don't have enough birders in the Adirondacks. We don't have enough birders in the Southern Tier, for example, in certain areas. So we have had trouble in past atlases getting adequate coverage for the state. So what we wanted to do this time around to make sure that every part of the state was sampled is this time we identified 1/3 of the blocks as priority blocks. So all of these purple blocks on this screen are priority blocks. And that doesn't mean that the other blocks aren't important. We want data from every block in the state if we can get it. But we want to make sure that we have adequate coverage in the priority blocks. We want to make sure we get at least 20 hours of daytime atlasing in the priority blocks. Because if we get that kind of coverage throughout the state, then we'll be able to do different kinds of statistical analysis and draw more firm conclusions based on a good sample instead of one that's kind of haphazard based on the distribution of birders in the state. So all blocks count, but priority blocks are really special to us because we want to make sure we get those covered. The nice thing is when you go to this website and you decide you want to look at the block in your yard, you can zoom in on this. So here is I seem to be skipping a slide every time. Let me see if I can go back one. So you can zoom in, and maybe you live here in the middle. Maybe you live here and you see it's not a priority block. Well, you can really contribute to the atlas by going just a little bit farther from your home to one of these priority blocks and doing your bird watching there instead of in your. We'd like you to bird in your home block as well, but we really want the data from the priority blocks, especially. We want to make sure we get those completed. And you can zoom in even farther. Okay, let's go, guys. Going too many each time. And when you zoom in even farther, you can actually see some of the habitats in these blocks. So you can actually print this block out. The roads are on them, the habitats are on them. And the reason this kind of a block is important, and the reason we encourage our atlasers to look at these carefully, is that you can see that there are different kinds of habitats in this block. You can see that there are fields in some areas, there's forest in other areas, there's a wetland in the left-hand side of the screen. We want to encourage birders to go to all the different habitats, because if you want to document all the birds in the block, you want to be sure that you visit all the habitats. So we ask our birders to stay in the blocks and record data only from that block when they are doing their surveys. We have minimum criteria, so they need to get to all the habitats. We want them to do 3 surveys throughout the season, at least one early in the season, one in the middle of the breeding season, and one towards the end of the season, so we can get early breeders, mid-season breeders, and late breeders. We asked them to also try and do 2 hours of nocturnal surveys, because we want to be sure we record some of the nocturnal birds like owls, for example, or nightjars, things like whippoorwills, if they're there, and maybe woodcock. These are birds that are only seen at night generally, unless you get extremely lucky. And so we are asking for 2 hours of nocturnal surveys as well. And then once you've decided what block you want to do, all you need to really do is go birding.
Kathy, there was a question about the state blocks map, the 2 slides back. Lee asked, why does the key for purple blocks state non-priority? Oh, I guess maybe the next one forward, sorry.
Okay. So,
no, maybe it might.
No, it is. It's the white one is non-priority. So it's the white thing is it looks like it's a white block. So the purple ones are the priority blocks, and the purple ones are available, meaning no one has said they're going to be a principal atlaser in that block. So I don't have any, there's no yellow ones shown on this particular slide, right? So there are no assigned blocks in this particular part of the state. So there's a nice open area where someone could go do some work.
Great, yep, yep, that clears it up. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure, yeah. So now we're going to send our volunteers out to go birding in their blocks, and we're going to ask them to record data. The nice thing about atlasing is that atlasing is a different kind of birding. You're not just going to make a list of birds you're able to identify. Instead, what you want to do is to watch the birds and observe their breeding behaviors and record what they are doing. So atlasers have to slow down and actually watch the birds. So the behaviors are classified based on how likely a bird is to be breeding in the block. So for example, if you just see a bird in a block, it might or might not be breeding there. Maybe that would just be observed behavior, would be possible breeding, okay? But if you see a bird doing something like courting, for example, that would be a higher level of probability of breeding. So we would call that, it's possible, probable is the next level up. And then if you see a bird doing something like some of the birds on this slide are doing, for example, carrying food or sitting on a nest, that is evidence of confirmed breeding. So atlasers have a whole bunch of different sets of what we're calling behavior codes, and they're asked to record what they observe. So a bird carrying food, the only reason to be carrying food and not eating it yourself is because you're taking it home to your babies. So that is a confirmed breeding code. A bird on a nest is a confirmed breeding code. A bird with recently fledged young, like this mute swan in the lower corner, that's also confirmed breeding. But the thrush that is just singing up there and defending a territory might or may not be breeding in the block. We would call that probable breeding, but not confirmed, because it could be just a migrant. It could be trying to set up a territory and not succeed, so it wouldn't be confirmed breeding. So we have all these different codes, and they basically fall into 3 categories. It's possible breeding, probable breeding, or confirmed breeding based on what the bird is doing. So based on what you see, then you were going to record that information. Now, how are we going to record this information? It used to be, if you were a birder, you just went into the field and you had a piece of paper or a notebook and you could write down your behavior codes that way. But in today's day and age, most people that are birding are using eBird for recording their information. So eBird, being on the steering committee, has agreed to set up a portal, which is a way that you can enter data and have it designated as being part of the New York State Breeding Bird Atlas. So, okay, didn't mean to do that. So this is the nice thing about eBird is if you're old school and you want to record your information in a notebook, you can, and then you can come home and you can put it into the computer using eBird. It's a pretty simple program. All you have to do is identify your location and record the birds you see with breeding codes. But if you do it through the portal, it will become part of the Breeding Bird Atlas as well. eBird also has an app. So that means that I'm sure many of you have used apps for different purposes, but eBird Mobile allows you to actually record your data on your phone in the field. And most of us who are using eBird actually love the app because not only does it have maps in it to show you where you are, it also records the data while you're in the field. And that way you don't have to come home and sit in front of the computer and do what I think of as birding homework when I get home. The information's already in eBird and I don't have to do it again. So it's beyond the scope of this talk tonight for me to actually talk about how to use eBird, but it's not particularly difficult. There is a free online course called eBird Essentials. The app is free, and Cornell's put together a course so that you can learn how to use it. On our Atlas website, we have a tutorial that not only talks about eBird, but also talks about the mobile version, because we know all our birders are going to want to use their phones in the field where they have maps as well. We also have been running training workshops in how to use eBird in the field and on a desktop. And we have actually set up a mentoring program because we really realize that using an app and putting data in the computer is going to be a barrier for some people. So we've set up data entry partners. So if you want to learn how to use eBird, we'll actually set you up with someone who can show you how to enter data into eBird in the field. I have in the handout that I've sent to Heidi, I've included my email address. So if anybody wants to use eBird, I'm willing to give you a personal lesson on how to do it, because I think it really is the modern way to record data. And it's the way to make sure that your data is used for conservation purposes. So we all love eBird, and the reason we love eBird is because it does things for us. It helps us find birds, for example. So I can look in eBird and see what birds are being seen around here and go see them. It also helps us make lists by recording data in eBird. I can put together, at the press of a button, I can get my life list or my county list, get someone competitive in Columbia County where all the eBirders see who's #1 for this year at the top of the list. But it really, the nice thing about eBird is because it's managed by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the data from the Atlas and the data that I record in eBird is used for conservation purposes. Cornell is constantly making this data available to scientists who do real scientific studies and publish papers like the one I showed you about 2.9 billion birds being lost using this kind of information. Okay. So learning eBird is relatively simple. There's a variety of different ways to do it. And so we adopted eBird to help us manage the data for this Breeding Bird Atlas because we think we can teach people to record data for conservation purposes this way, and because it allows us to manage millions and millions of records that we wouldn't be able to manage on paper very well at all. I'm ready to talk about results, but I want to stop for a minute and see if there were any questions at this point. Anything, Heidi?
No, so far just that one. So I think you're good to carry on. Okay.
So in the last few minutes, I want to talk about what we've learned from the first 2 years of our third Breeding Bird Atlas here in New York State. First thing I'll tell you is that we're seeing a lot of birds, but also there are lots and lots of people involved. 2 years into our third Atlas, we have more than 2,000 people participating across New York State in this endeavor. We've had over 200,000 checklists submitted through the Atlas portal. I'll note that 92% of those purple priority blocks that I showed you around the state have been visited at least once, okay? We've been able to confirm that there are 218 species breeding in New York, which is exciting information. And we have millions of observations, and more than a quarter of those have breeding codes. So we're getting lots and lots of information, and that's very comforting to know that people are that enthusiastic about it. We've learned a few other things though as well. It's a record amount of effort and data, and we're really very pleased with it. One of the things we've learned is a bit about our geographic coverage. This shows a number of different ways of displaying much the same information. If you look at these maps, you can see that, let's look at daytime hours, for example. You can see the blocks that have not been touched, and look where the holes are. There are holes in the Adirondacks. Let's see, I think I am supposed to, there are holes in the St. Lawrence Valley and the Plattsburgh area. If you look up the northern part of the state, you can see that area has little coverage. The Adirondacks, the central Mohawk Valley, the Alleghenies in the western part of the state, which is fairly sparsely populated, and parts of the Catskills and the Delaware Water Gap. These are areas that don't have a lot of people. And it basically shows that our effort is concentrated around high population centers, around urban areas. We also have low nocturnal effort. If you look at the lower right-hand picture, you can see that we are lacking nocturnal areas for large parts of the state. Where we have nocturnal coverage is where we have regular coverage as well. So we basically aren't getting nocturnal coverage in most of the state. And people just really, I think, don't really like to bird at night. And that's a lesson. We may have to put some money behind some people that we can pay to go out at night to actually get us the nocturnal records that we need. Let's see. This is a different slide showing basically the same thing. It shows there are issues with geographic coverage. So look at where the very dark blue places, counties are. Those are counties that have very good coverage. They're also counties that have high population levels. So Monroe County in western part of the state stands out. Well, that's where Rochester is. There's a very active birding club in Rochester. Look at Tompkins County and the Finger Lakes. Guess what? That's where Cornell is. So we've got lots of coverage around Cornell. And of course, the Hudson Valley, Columbia County isn't as high as some of the other ones, but Dutchess County has a very active bird club, and that bird club has made a concerted effort to go out and make sure that their Atlas blocks are covered. Long Island's got a high population density, and we have lots of birders down there. So the lessons we've learned out of these first 2 years that we have to find a way to get birders to go to the places like Schoharie County and Fulton County and Lewis County and Yates County, places where we don't have coverage. So this summer, we will be actually paying 2 technicians to atlas in some of these areas. We've put out an advertising for someone who is able to identify birds by sight and sound and who knows how to use eBird and is able to do atlasing in some parts of the state where we don't have adequate coverage. We don't like to do this. We like to do this with volunteers, but we don't want to take any chances on not getting the coverage that we need. So we are going to pay 2 people this year to get started on some parts of the Adirondacks where we're lacking coverage. So here's another one of our priorities. Remember I told you that we wanted to we wanted to do the priority blocks. So we have certain criteria when we say that a block has had an adequate amount of coverage. So we're asking our birders to go to priority blocks. We'd like to get many of them covered. We are 2 years into a 5-year project. So if you do the math, ideally we would have 40% of this project done by now. So we wanted at least 2 hours of nocturnal effort in these blocks. We only have 2 hours of nocturnal effort in 8% of the blocks. So we're falling short with nocturnal hours. We need 20 hours in each block to feel like we have adequate coverage. We're not quite up to 40% there. We expect somewhere between 55 and 95 species likely to be at some level of breeding confirmation. We don't have that at 40%. We've only got 33% of the blocks that way. So basically, without going through a whole lot of information here, what I'm telling you is that we can use your help. You do not have to be an expert birder to participate in the atlas. You would know if you saw a robin's nest, and that any level of information. If you're only capable of identifying and documenting breeding in 10 species, so that's great. That's 10 confirmed records we might not have had. So any birder can help contribute to this effort by simply recording confirmed breeding information through our portal and through the atlas techniques that we've developed for this project. It's a little bit early, but I wanted to show you a little bit of data from birds that we've been looking at. This shows bald eagles, and there are 3 maps here. The first one from the atlas, the first atlas that took place in the 1980s. The next slide, or the next picture of New York State, shows breeding records from the second atlas. And you can see that bald eagle had increased dramatically just between the first and second atlas. The third map shows bald eagle distribution based on the first 2 years of this third atlas. And you can see that bald eagles are doing just great in New York State. It's one of those conservation success stories. We were down to 1 pair of breeding bald eagles in the state in the 1980s. And they've recovered dramatically, and they're doing really well. So it's nice to be able to report some good news. Once again, too many. Here's Merlin. I mentioned Merlin earlier. Merlin was not in New York State during the first atlas, but the second atlas, it had a pretty good stronghold, mostly in the Adirondacks. But with 2 years of data, you can see that Merlin has expanded its range well beyond the Adirondacks. There are now breeding Merlins in the Hudson Valley. They're more widely distributed in the western part of the state as well. So Merlin is continuing to expand its range, and we'll be able to demonstrate that with Breeding Bird Atlas information. I did want to talk about barn swallows, though, because this shows a bird that's not doing as well. Barn swallows are aerial insectivores. They catch insects on the wing. We're grateful for every mosquito they take. They are fairly common still. They were widely distributed, as you can see, in the 1980s. But even in 2000, 2005, during the second atlas, there are fewer records than there were during that first atlas. We become really concerned about aerial insectivores because of some new data that suggests that insect populations are in decline. And in fact, in 2 years of our atlas, we are already seeing that there are some parts of the state where we're worried about barn swallows not showing up or not being documented as breeding. Now we've got 3 more years to go, and I'm hopeful that this map will fill in the next 3 years. But I can tell you, based on a study that was done in Canada, aerial insectivores as a group are declining dramatically in Canada. If you look at the right side of this slide, this is from a paper on the state of Canada's birds that was published in 2019. And you can see that barn swallow is the bottom line on this graph. And barn swallows have undergone a dramatic decline in Canada. And we believe this is associated with a decline in aerial insect populations in Canada. And we're hoping we're not going to see the same sort of thing in New York State when we finish our atlas this time. What's that? Not end of slideshow. This is what I wanted to show you, this cute slide of a rose-breasted grosbeak. This is a female rose-breasted grosbeak. So that's basically what I can tell you after 2 years of information. And I did also want to show this picture of my book because Heidi wanted me to talk about my book. and I said, well, I really want to talk about the atlas. But I'm going to mention that when I retired from teaching, I wrote this book on birding in the Hudson Valley. And the first part of this book is basically an introduction into how to get into bird watching. So if you're wondering about what kind of binoculars you need or how to use them or how to begin to find birds, the first third of my book is about that. The rest of the book is all about places to go bird watching in the Hudson Valley. So if you're just getting started, I think my book is a good place to start. So I'd be happy to answer questions if anyone has any that they'd like to throw my way at this point.
I have one here, Kathy, that in terms of the Merlin, do you know what well, I guess the expanded range, is that due to habitat, that there's now better habitat for them? Is it related to climate change?
I wish I knew.
Yeah,
I do not know why Merlins are expanding their range. I mean, 40 years ago when I was bird watching in Virginia, I was thrilled to see a Merlin. You used to have to go to the coast to see them in migration, but they nest in golf courses. Some of the earliest nests in New York State were found on golf courses. There's one nesting in Washington Park in Albany now. I mean, I do not understand Merlin. I do not know why they're expanding their range, but I'm really glad they are. That's all I can say.
Yeah, thanks. So one other question here, how, you had mentioned that there's sort of a mentorship opportunity. So if somebody is really interested in participating in the Atlas, can they sort of team up with somebody who
certainly
knows how to do it to learn? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm willing to help anybody that's local, but anybody that wants to participate, that's what the regional coordinators' jobs are. So the first thing I would do if someone told me that they wanted to work on the Atlas, I would send them to the website so they can find out we have something we call Atlas Essentials, which are basically how to get started on the Atlas. But if they want to talk and work with a real person, the regional coordinators' jobs are to basically teach people how to do atlasing. Wendy Tochi, who's one of the regional coordinators in the Hudson Valley, has held a number of bird walks in which she focuses on atlasing, and she shows people how to use eBird for atlasing, how to find things on maps, how to record data. So the regional coordinators are doing that all across the state. A lot of us are acting as mentors to people who want to learn. And I will just say that our website is really, really good. If you didn't have a real human being to teach you, I think you could learn from the website as well. There are tutorials there, which are just excellent.
And that would go over some of the codes, the breeding bird codes, and
all the codes are there. Yep.
Okay.
I mean, there's everything about how to find your way using a map. I mean, there's lots of good information, how to be sure you're staying in the block. All that kind of information is available.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So another question here is, what is or are your preferred guidebooks for identifying birds?
Well, that's a loaded question. I have half a dozen field guides. I mean, most people that use books have more than one because you can't always get the answer you need out of one book, so you go to another. Honestly, I don't ever carry a field guide with me anymore in the field because we have apps. My phone makes bird watching much, much easier. So I have apps on my phone that help with bird identification. And Cornell Lab, once again, has a really great app called Merlin Bird ID. It's a free app, and it basically asks you 5 questions. It asks you, well, first of all, your phone knows stuff about you. It knows that it's winter, for example, and there wouldn't be any hummingbirds here. So your phone knows the season, it knows the date, it knows your location. So it's already got 2 important pieces of information in bird identification. It asks you questions about how big the bird is. Is it the size of a Canada goose or is it the size of a sparrow? So you give the app that information. It asks you information about colors. What are the primary colors of the bird? You can choose, red and black, put those colors in, and then it asks you, what is the bird doing? Is it flying? Is it perched? Is it on the ground? Is it in a tree? You put the 2 pieces that your phone already has and answer those 3 questions. And then it comes up with a bunch of pictures and you can pick your bird out of those pictures. So if I wouldn't use a field guide, except at home to learn more about the birds, I would use Merlin Bird ID in the field now because it's just so much easier to do things on your phone if you have a smartphone.
And the relatively new feature with the Sound ID is so cool.
Yeah, it is.
So you can record the sounds that you're hearing, and it'll give you, and from a pretty good distance. I was surprised.
It's great, isn't it? Yeah. It makes it like you don't really need any skills anymore, you know?
I was going to say it makes me feel smart.
Used to be I could be the expert because I could identify birds by song, but now everybody can do it.
Well, I mean, sometimes it does get it wrong.
That's right. It does occasionally.
So another question that's come in is, would it be helpful to just report birds in your own yard that exhibit breeding behavior?
Sure. I mean, every breeding bird counts. You know, you're in a block someplace. You might not be in a priority block, but you're in a block. We're interested in every bit of breeding bird behavior that we can get, as long as you stay in New York State, you know?
But the first step you would suggest is to see if your house might be in one of the priority blocks. And so if that's the case, then definitely get outside and
there's nothing better than living in a priority block. You can confirm birds while you're lying in bed, you know? It's great.
Okay, so other questions? Feel free to unmute too if you'd like to stretch your vocal cords or put more questions in the chat.
There had been a question earlier when everyone was sharing what birds they were hoping to see. Someone asked, where do you see eagle chicks?
You know, they're in the nest, and you know, an eagle nest is really deep and really big. So you don't usually see the chicks until they're getting ready to leave the nest. But there's an eagle nest that you can see from the boat launch in Hudson. If you go down right now, while the leaves are still off the trees, there's a pair of eagles nesting across from the Hudson boat launch. And the nest is really obvious. Just scan the tree line. You can see it straight across the river on the Middle Ground Island. And they probably have eggs now. I saw the female on the nest last week. So there will be, assuming everything goes well, there will be chicks, big chicks, sitting around the edge of that nest, begging for food before too long. Usually you wait until April. I think that's when you would start to see the young coming out of the nest.
And it's not the data that's being collected. It's not that they want like every different breeding activity necessarily. No. It can just be one of those different types of breeding activity is confirmation of breeding. So
that's right. That's exactly right. By far, the easiest confirmed code is to see the parents carrying food. It's really easy to see the parents carrying food. Finding a nest, that's pretty hard. But adults carrying food, that's easy, and that's confirmed breeding. So you can get a lot of confirmations well into July because the birds are still breeding at that time.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize that. So another question is, are there priority blocks in Columbia County?
Oh, yes, a whole bunch of them. There's a whole bunch of priority blocks that aren't even claimed yet by principal atlasers. There's untouched blocks in Columbia County, untouched priority blocks. Okay. And I went to, it takes a fair amount of time to get enough confirmation. So I chose my 2 blocks, and I've been working on them really hard for 2 years. And I finally thought, well, maybe I should move on. I've got enough information from these 2 blocks. So I chose another one the end of the season last year, and it's beautiful. It's got a lovely wetland in it, that's accessible, and it's got some beautiful forest land. I should have been exploring earlier.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Another question about, does encouraging nesting in your yard with bird boxes count as well?
You bet. That's one of the easiest kind of confirmed. I mean, seeing a bluebird going into a nest box, that's confirmed breeding. And I've done that. I've confirmed bluebirds in my yard that way. So any nest box, that's a breeding record if they're going into a nest box and at the right time of year.
How big are each block?
They're about 3 miles square. Not exactly, because of course we deal in the metric system, so it's kilometers, but they're about 3 miles square.
And the goal is to sort of sample that whole 3 miles.
All the habitats. You want to try and get into all the habitats that are accessible. We're not encouraging people to trespass or anything like that. But to the extent that you can visit a wetland, if there's a wetland in the block, we'd like you to do that. We want to visit all the habitats so we can get all the different kinds of birds.
Great. Let's see. Other questions? Yes, so one of the questions was, will the handout be sent to get all the information? Yes, we will. It'll likely be early next week that we will get the video uploaded and the handout sent out with that, a link to the video for folks that either had to leave early or that couldn't join. So we will definitely share that with all of the links. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? We still have a little bit. We're technically scheduled for 7 till 7, but if we end early, there's no problem with that. I've been thinking, and now I'm just thinking, I wonder if we should offer a little Atlas training program. I'm super interested.
Well, I'd be happy to do it for you.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll look at our schedule and. Mm-hmm. Going back to how you were mentioning the portal on the app.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you are out just on a walk or whatever, and you're collecting data in eBird, do you have to do something special to get in the portal?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
Yes. Let me see if I can find that slide. Let's see. This one. So if you're using the app, okay, this is a phone. Okay, there's a tools button here, and you click on that, and then you go down to settings. The settings is one, you go down to the bottom menu where it says settings, and it says choose portal. So there are a lot of different portals because there are bird atlases going on in other states, and there are lots of other projects that are using eBird. So you want to scroll down that list until you find the New York Breeding Bird Atlas. And once you set it, we're encouraging people that are doing atlasing to leave it on the portal year round, because we're continuing to gather data for the atlas even outside the breeding season. So you set the portal that way on the phone. If you are putting it in the computer, and this is what would be the screen that you would have if you were putting it in the computer, you need to make sure you need to set the portal here too. And you do it by going to settings, and you choose the New York State Breeding Bird Atlas. And you can tell you're in the portal because when you're in the portal, it has our logo here, the pileated woodpecker. If it has this, which is the sapsucker, which is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology logo, you are not in the portal, okay? I should say that information that you put in through the portal helps the atlas, but it also goes into eBird, so your records are useful to you as well. It's not like you're going to not have access to them because you put them in through the portal. It all gets compiled by eBird and used across the whole platform.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Yeah. So if you're collecting data in January, you're not
going to see breeding behavior probably in January. I mean, there are a few birds like great horned owl that might be doing breeding behavior, and in fact, we're anxious to have that kind of information, but from those early breeders. But there's no real danger by leaving it on the portal year round.
Okay, great.
The only thing you have to watch out for is if you have it on the portal, as I do all the time now. Then I went to Connecticut this weekend. You want to make sure that you don't put Connecticut birds in the New York portal. So you need to change it when you leave the state. So.
All right, good to know. Okay, are any of our 10 conservation areas in priority blocks? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head.
All right, that's what I'm going to look at.
But you can start looking. And
I'm going to.
I'm sure at least one. I know that Over Mountain is not. There was someone that was very upset that Over Mountain was not a priority block. But that doesn't mean that that's not important to. I mean, that place is getting Atlas to death anyhow. So because there are people that are really interested in Over Mountain. So
yeah, and you may have mentioned this and I didn't catch it, but how were the priority blocks selected? Was it random?
Yeah, we wanted to get a random sample from across the state. And what we did was we thought, well, we want to do more than just one block. And these are our USGS quads. So each block is a sixth of a USGS quad. So we wanted to do more than one. So we chose two that were distributed across the quad. The other thing we did was we tested to make sure that the priority blocks were representative of the habitats across the state. So they did an analysis of all the different habitats, how much forest there was and how much wetland there was, and just to make sure that our priority blocks were representative of the different habitats in the state, and they're spot on. So we know that if we get data from these priority blocks, we will have a representative sample.
Great. And are there any birds that the Atlas is particularly interested in getting data for?
Yes, for sure. I mean, we held an event last year. We called it the Big Atlas Weekend. And what we did was we got atlasers. There are atlases going on in other states. So there's one in Maine and there's one in Virginia. And I can't remember the other one, but there are four states that are currently using eBird and doing breeding bird atlases. And we had this one weekend in June when we were most likely to be able to confirm birds. And we basically rallied the troops and say, okay, we want all you atlasers to go out there and confirm as many species as you can. At the same time, we also asked them to look for certain species that we are particularly interested in from a conservation perspective. So grassland birds are ones we really want to get documented. We want to document breeding of grassland birds wherever we can find it. So we had prizes for this big weekend. So they went out, the people that confirmed the most grassland birds that we were targeting got a free course from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And we're going to repeat this Big Atlas Weekend this June. And we had a competition between the different states that were involved. Maine won the last year, but I'm confident that New York State can do better next year. So we got a lot of atlasers out during that weekend, and we got a lot of birds confirmed during that weekend. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, let us know and we'll help promote it.
Okay, that's great. Will.
Okay, any other questions? Kathy, do you have a bird that you're particularly excited to see this spring?
Oh, goodness. I have to think about that. I'm always excited when the warblers come back. So there are a few warblers that I'm looking forward to seeing, like cerulean warblers. Cerulean warblers are not very common in Columbia County, and I'd like to see them.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for this great presentation. And
well, thank you everybody who stuck to the end. It was great.
Yeah, we had a few people had to pop off to another program, so they were they're glad that we'll be recording it or that we have recorded it. And I will be in touch with you, Kathy, to schedule a little Bird Atlas 101 in the field. And,
okay, that's great.
I'm excited because I feel like I have I have, like I said, I told you before the presentation started, I had done a little bit with some friends and found it really interesting, but it was a little intimidating. I was like, I don't want to do it wrong, and I don't want to, I don't want to mess up the data or whatever. And so I feel like a little training would be helpful for lots of folks. And
I'm sure it would be. But don't worry, you can't mess it up. We have a way of getting rid of all the bad records.
Well, that does make me feel better that, like, I definitely, I feel like I can identify, probably, like you said, 10 species pretty, pretty well. And so I feel like I just need to now pay more attention to what they're doing rather than just checking off that I saw them.
Well, there's this one guy I know who I bird with once in a while. He's a pretty good birder, but he said that he had goldfinches nesting in his yard, and he happens to live in an atlas block that I'm working in. And I said, "You got goldfinch confirmed?" And he said, because I hadn't been able to confirm goldfinch. I said, "I want you to put that in the atlas. That record's really, really important." So it's any contribution is welcome.
Okay, great. Well, for anybody who wants to get out and learn more about the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is another great citizen science project that a lot of these partners for the Breeding Bird Atlas, we will be out with one of our very good experienced birders and board member, Will Yandick, on Saturday at Ooms Conservation Area at 8 a.m. Hopefully it won't be too cold and too slippery. We're planning to be there, and we'll be collecting data. We've been doing that for a number of years, and it's a really great opportunity to learn more about the birds that are here in the winter, and just spend some time outside looking at birds. So if you want to attend that, you can visit our website. There's information on that. But again, thank you, Kathy.
Okay.
And thank you everyone for joining us. And I'm going to stop our recording.